It's been called the most audacious, abstract, and ambiguous film of the year. It's more like a Picasso. There isn't much of a plot, and it's not so much entertainment as one might call it engagement. Some have found it absurd, others stunning. Some have found it maddening, and others have found it beautiful. You probably have never seen anything like it, and you will probably never see anything like it again. It's Terrence Malick's latest film, The Tree of Life. And it begins with that magnificent quote from the book of Job, where God says to Job, he says, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth, when the morning stars sang together?" The movie is set in 1950s Waco, Texas. It's about the O'Brien family, mom, dad, and 3 sons. One of the sons dies, and the family is overwhelmed in grief. Their lives have been changed forever. All seems lost to them. And gripped by grief, this is what Mrs. O'Brien says to you and me who watch this movie. She says, there are 2 ways through life, the way of nature and the way of grace. You have to choose which one to follow. The movie challenges us to ask ourselves, do we get lost in the reality of brute nature and its merciless indifference to us, always pointing out how insignificant we are? Or do we surrender to grace, the wonders and beauty of creation and all of its magnificence? Grace is about detaching from what's happening in our world and experiencing the sacredness all around us. And this is really what the movie is. It's a journey of grace, constantly reminding us that we have a choice. As brilliantly confusing as this movie is, it does present us with some very powerful themes. The themes are how to accept change, the need to constantly let go, the need to allow your children to be who they are and not always try to change them. And it's about accepting our parents and finally forgiving them and realizing they did the very best they could do. The movie is about the beauty and the messiness of life. And it's all about change. And it asks us to ponder the question, do we resist change and allow ourselves to be overwhelmed by the brute forces of nature? Or do we engage change, enter into the moment, and experience the world with all of its wonders as constantly changing, but allowing this change to bring us to an experience of God, similar to the experience that Job came to in his own life. The gospel this weekend tells us to stay awake. We know neither the day nor the hour. This is the challenge that comes to us from this movie, The Tree of Life. The O'Brien family has lost a son. They can either give up on life and fall asleep because life is so indifferent and merciless, or they can enter into life and stay awake to the grace-filled moments all around them. It's the challenge of the movie. It's the challenge that comes to each one of us. Because as we all know, life can be unmerciful toward us. We lose people that we love. We all have to grow old. We get sick. Some of us lose our jobs. Life is about perpetual change. Do we fall asleep and give up? Do we enter into it fully? think we all have to admit that change is difficult for all of us. It's a break in our normal routine. It's a threat to our security. It's an alteration of our current lifestyle. It's the unknown, the ambiguous, the uncertainty that we face after a loss. It unsettles the calm and peace that we want in our lives. And we're flooded with feelings. There's fear and discouragement, insecurity, anxiety, excitement, dread, confusion, depression. Do we stay and face it? Do we sleep and deny it? Now, one example of change that's going to impact on all of us happens the first Sunday of this coming Advent season, November 27th. Our church has revised the Roman Missal, the prayers that we use during our liturgical celebration here. So the words that we say and hear at Mass are about to change. The Mass will be the same, but the sound will be different. So why this change? Well, today, translators have a much better sense of how to achieve their desired results. They have a firmer grasp on the meaning of the original texts and the demands of proclaiming. So the revised translation hopefully will have much more depth to it. The words of the Mass often allude to biblical texts, and this new translation brings more of these allusions to light. There's a greater adherence to the original Latin. Many of the Latin prayers are very poetic, and this was lost in the first translation. So the purpose of this translation is so that we can have a better experience and understanding of the Latin. You'll see a difference in attitude. Some of the prayers are much more humble, a bit more modest in the presence of an awesome God. The prayers hopefully acknowledge the majesty of God and the boldness of this enterprise that we are all involved in, human beings struggling to talk to this God of ours. So the first Sunday of Advent is November 27th, when we will all begin this journey together. As I have been reflecting on this new translation over the past number of months, and admittedly not looking forward to implementing it, I have begun to see it as an opportunity to really become more aware of what I am saying and proclaiming in Eucharist. After almost 35 years of being a priest, celebrating Eucharist, and a few more years before that time participating, the prayers and responses definitely can become rote and mechanical. So I do see it as a new opportunity to, as the Gospel says this weekend, stay awake and truly enter into the real poetry of the Mass. But it's a change, and definitely it would be so much easier for all of us to keep things as they have been for the last 40 years. But this is not what life is all about. So I do hope that these changes will also be an opportunity for all of you to be more aware of the words that we say at Mass, understand more the poetry of the Latin, and deepen all of our relationships with God. Again, the gospel this weekend, it challenges us to stay awake. In the movie The Tree of Life, Terrence Malick, the director, sets in front of us brute nature, the immensity of the natural world, its merciless indifference, and always points out how insignificant we are. But in the midst of this constantly changing and perplexing world, there is grace and the wonders of creation. Now, this movie ponders the creation of the world. It confronts us with life itself, with death and afterlife, and everything in between. It's a movie that's filled with sounds and disjointed narrations and stunning images. It's all about what we know and don't know. It's all about what we fear and don't fear as children, as adults, as men, as women, as fathers and mothers. As I sat and engaged it, because it was confusing and is confusing, it did take me back 50 years, growing up on the north side of Syracuse with a typical 50s family of brothers and sisters and mother and father and family meals and all the challenges of family life, all the good times and rough times, sad times, and all those grace-filled moments. Moments that the movie points out, and certainly I experienced, and I'm sure all of you have, moments that pass in the blink of an eye. Mrs. O'Brien in that movie looks at us, and she asks and presents the right challenge. There are two ways to go through life: the way of nature and the way of grace. And each one of us has to choose which one to follow.